Mirka Federer never speaks, and when she finally did, the entire tennis world stopped breathing. A $50 million secret, a billionaire's hidden bet, a confession nobody anticipated, and a young Filipina at the center of it all. What happens when the most guarded woman behind the greatest champion alive pulls back the curtain and what she reveals shatters every assumption you had about power, legacy, and who Roger Federer is truly investing in? This isn't a rumor, this isn't clickbait, this is the story nobody dared to tell. Until now. Stay until the final word, because the last revelation, nobody saw it coming. To understand why Mirka Federer's confession shook the world, you must first understand who Mirka Federer actually is. She is not a footnote, she is not a background figure clutching a designer handbag courtside while Roger plays God on a tennis court. Mirka Federer, now Federer, was herself a professional tennis player, a top 76 ranked competitor who represented Switzerland at the 2000 Sydney Olympics, a woman who earned every step of her career before a devastating foot injury stripped it away, ending her playing days in 2002 at just 24 years old. Imagine that, at the peak of your physical power, the sport you gave your childhood to, gone, not by choice, by cruelty. And yet, instead of retreating into bitterness, Mirka made a different decision. She stepped behind the curtain and became the architect of one of the most dominant sporting legacies in human history. She became Roger's manager, his strategist, his emotional compass. She traveled to every tournament, absorbed every pressure, and shielded him from everything that could have broken his focus. For over 2 decades, the world watched Roger Federer win 20 Grand Slam titles, spend 310 weeks at world number 1, and earn nearly $131 million in prize money. But the quiet truth, Mirka was the spine holding all of it upright. So when Mirka speaks, understand this: it is not accidental. Every word she releases into the world is deliberate, measured, intentional, which is precisely why, when she opened up about Roger's secret $50 million investment, an investment tied directly to a 20-year-old Filipina named Alex Eala, the silence that followed was deafening. Because Mirka doesn't just talk, Mirka confesses, and this confession cracked something open. It started, as most remarkable stories do, with a pair of sneakers. Back in 2019, Mirka purchased a pair of running shoes from a Swiss startup called On, a small, ambitious brand built in Zurich, founded by 3 entrepreneurs chasing a wild dream, footwear that felt like running on clouds. She wore them, she loved them, and she told Roger. That single moment, a wife recommending a shoe brand to her husband, would trigger a chain of events worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Roger met the founders over dinner, listened, believed, and then quietly invested $50 million for a 3% stake in On Holding AG. The co-founder, Olivier Bernard, described it at the time as not traditional athlete sponsorship. He was right. It was something far larger, far more consequential. When On went public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2021, Roger Federer became one of the rare athletes whose business empire eclipsed his playing career. His stake ballooned to an estimated $375 to $500 million as On's market cap surged towards $17 billion. The Swiss boy who once fetched balls at the Basel indoor tournament was now officially a billionaire. But here's what most people missed, what Mirka's confession later illuminated with startling clarity. That $50 million wasn't just an investment in sneakers. It was an investment in a vision, a philosophy, a belief that tennis, women's tennis specifically, was about to witness a transformation. And at the center of that transformation stood a young woman from Quezon City, Philippines, who nobody outside Manila had heard of yet. Her name was Alexandra Eala, and Roger Federer had already noticed. Before the world discovered Alex Eala, Roger Federer did. That claim sounds dramatic, but consider the timeline and it becomes impossible to dismiss. Eala had been training at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Mallorca since she was 13 years old, a Filipino teenager grinding through European clay courts, outworking players with more privilege, more resources, and more institutional backing. She didn't have a federation pushing her forward. She had discipline, ferocity, and a serve that arrived on the other side of the net before her opponents mentally prepared for it. By the time Eala reached the WTA Tour, On Running, Roger's brand, had already begun signing emerging tennis talent. Iga Swiatek, Ben Shelton, João Fonseca, a deliberate, surgical expansion into tennis through athletes who carried both competitive brilliance and commercial magnetism. And then came Alex Eala's Miami Open 2025 miracle. She arrived as a wild card. Nobody gave her a sentence in the previews. Nobody built graphics around her match schedule. She was, in the language of tournament organizers, a filler name, a story that would end in round one. Instead, Eala dismantled Madison Keys, then Yelena Ostapenko, then, and this is the moment that changed everything, she defeated Iga Swiatek, the 6 Grand Slam champion, the world's dominant force. Gone. Beaten by a wild card from the Philippines with a smile that, as Roger's former coach Paul Annacone later described on Tennis Channel Live, lights up a room.
Annacone was specific. I remember last year when she beat Iga Swiatek, and she did it with a lot of grace and humility. I like her game. She's got a lot of good hand-eye coordination and ability to take the ball early and redirect. Those words, grace, humility, hand-eye coordination, redirecting, those are not compliments. Those are the language of scouts, of investors, of people who recognize value before the market does. Roger Federer watched that Miami run, and what happened next, according to Mirka's now viral confession, was not coincidental. Because the question you should be asking right now is this. When a $1.3 billion athlete, a man who turned a sneaker conversation into $500 million, quietly begins moving resources toward a 20-year-old Filipina, does he do it by accident? Absolutely not. Nobody expected Mirka Federer to speak publicly about Alex Eala. Nobody expected her to speak publicly about anything. For years, Mirka had mastered the art of strategic invisibility. She attended the Paris Fashion Week Dior Home Show with Roger in June 2025. She appeared at Wimbledon. She traveled. She smiled. She said nothing of real substance to the press. And then, in what sources close to the Federer camp described as a carefully arranged moment, Mirka sat down and opened up. Her confession did not arrive as a press conference. It arrived the way all genuinely explosive revelations do, quietly, almost casually. A comment here, a reflection there, words that when assembled together painted a picture that left journalists, tennis analysts, and fans worldwide completely speechless. What did she say? She confirmed that the On investment, Roger's $50 million stake, was her idea, her discovery, her sneaker purchase that sparked an empire. But more than that, she revealed something about Roger's relationship with emerging tennis talent that had never been publicly articulated. She described how Roger, in retirement, had become deeply invested, philosophically and financially, in the next generation of the sport. How he watched women's tennis with a particular attention, how a certain performance in Miami 2025 had occupied his conversations at their Zurich home for weeks afterward. She didn't say Eala's name. She didn't need to. The timeline was undeniable. Because the same period Mirka was describing, that spring of 2025, those weeks following Miami, was precisely when On Running's internal conversations about expanding their women's tennis portfolio were, according to industry sources, accelerating dramatically. Was Roger Federer orchestrating a direct $50 million investment in Alex Eala's career infrastructure? Not in the literal transactional sense, but what Mirka's confession revealed was something more sophisticated and far more consequential. Roger wasn't writing a check to Eala. He was building the platform she would ascend. On running signing Eala, on running expanding its women's tennis presence, Roger's philosophical endorsement of Eala as a transformational figure for the sport, Mirka providing the context that made all of it make sense. This is how billionaires invest, not with announcements, with architecture. And Mirka, the woman who built Roger's empire brick by quiet brick, had just handed the world the blueprint. The moment Mirka's words began circulating, the reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. Tennis Twitter, a historically unforgiving arena, fractured along predictable lines. One camp celebrated, the other questioned. Both were loud. Supporters of Eala flooded comment sections with a kind of fierce pride that bordered on protective. Philippines fans who had watched their nation's tennis daughter defy every bracket prediction, dismantle every seeded opponent, and carry an entire archipelago's hope on shoulders not yet 21 years old, treated Mirka's confession as vindication, as proof that the world's greatest champions recognized what they had always known. Alex Eala was exceptional. She beat Swiatek with grace and humility, one fan posted, echoing Annacone's exact phrasing. Of course, Roger noticed. Excellence always notices excellence. But another corner of the internet pushed back hard. Critics argued the framing was dangerous, that positioning a $50 million investment, even architecturally, around a single young player placed unreasonable expectations on a 20-year-old still building her career, that the pressure of being Roger Federer's chosen one could crush rather than elevate. Sports analysts entered the debate with data. Eala's ranking had surged to world number 31 by early 2026, a staggering climb from the obscurity of a wildcard entry 12 months prior. Her victory over Clara Tauson at the 2025 U.S. Open had earned her a first Grand Slam triumph. Her Dubai Tennis Championships run in 2026 had added Jasmine Paolini, a Grand Slam champion herself, to her list of scalped opponents. The numbers were not ambiguous. Eala was not a project. She was a phenomenon already in motion. But what Mirka's confession had done, intentionally or otherwise, was collapse the distance between Eala's athletic trajectory and the Federer financial universe. Two worlds that operated separately were now publicly understood as adjacent. And adjacency in tennis, where endorsement money, brand alignment, and legacy narratives determine which athletes receive generational support, is everything. On Running's market cap was approaching $17 billion. Roger's stake alone was worth north of $400 million. If Eala entered that ecosystem, formally, officially, contractually, the commercial architecture surrounding her career would transform overnight. The internet wasn't just watching a confession, it was watching in real time the potential reshaping of an athlete's entire financial future. Was anyone genuinely prepared for that? Was Eala herself?
Strip away the drama, remove the viral heat and the fan tribalism and the Twitter wars. What does Mirka's confession actually reveal when examined without emotion? It reveals three things, each more significant than the last. First, Mirka Federer is not passive. She is an active architect of the Federer financial empire. The On investment began with her. The identification of emerging talent flows through her observations, her conversations, her instincts formed by years of competitive tennis at the highest accessible level. When Mirka speaks about a young female athlete with something unmistakable in her game, she is not offering a casual opinion. She is offering an assessment built on lived experience. Second, Roger Federer's retirement has not diminished his influence. It has focused it. Without the demands of competition, training, and recovery consuming his attention, Federer has redirected his formidable intelligence toward brand architecture, talent ecosystem building, and legacy cultivation. His involvement with On Running, signing Swiatek, Fonseca, Shelton, is not random. It is systematic, and it is expanding precisely where women's tennis is experiencing its most explosive period of global viewership growth. Third, and this is the piece that nobody is discussing loudly enough, the story of Mirka discovering On Running through a simple shoe purchase is not just charming, it is a masterclass in how generational wealth compounds. A $50 million bet on a brand worth $17 billion. A confession that positions Mirka not as a supporter, but as a co-architect, an emerging Filipino tennis star at the intersection of all of it. Roger Federer built his $1.3 billion net worth not through aggression, but through elegance, patience, and the willingness to act when others hesitated. His former coach, Paul Annacone, described Eala with language that mirrors exactly how analysts once described a young Federer: technical precision, early ball striking, grace under pressure. The parallels are not accidental, they are architectural. Because here is the question that Mirka's confession quietly plants in every informed mind. When Roger Federer, the man who turned a dinner conversation with shoe founders into $500 million, recognizes those same qualities in a 20-year-old Filipina, what exactly do you think he does next? He doesn't wait, he builds. Alex Eala does not know the full scope of what Mirka's confession has set in motion, or perhaps she does, and perhaps that is the most interesting story of all. She is 20 years old, world number 31 and climbing, a wild card who became a semifinalist, a wild card who became a champion, a girl from Quezon City who defeated the world's best and then said, with the particular humility that made Paul Annacone pause on live television, "I would love to play Coco Gauff again. I always learn a lot when I share the court with her." That sentence alone tells you everything about who Alex Eala is. The hunger without arrogance, the ambition without ego, the willingness to frame every encounter, even victories over legends, as a lesson rather than a conquest. These are not manufactured qualities. They cannot be coached into someone who doesn't already carry them. They are character. And character, in the long biography of professional tennis, is what separates champions from legends. Roger Federer was a champion at 21. He became a legend at 35. The distance between those two designations was built from exactly what Annacone identified in Eala: grace, humility, and the relentless desire to get better. Mirka understood that. She understood it because she watched it build in real time across 2 decades of marriage, travel, heartbreak, and triumph. She knows what the early signs would look like. She has seen them from the most intimate vantage point available. And when she broke her silence, when the most strategically quiet woman in professional tennis decided to speak, she wasn't confessing a secret. She was signaling a beginning. On Running's empire continues expanding. Eala's rankings continue surging. Federer's brand architecture continues absorbing the best emerging talent in the sport. And somewhere in Zurich, in a home where 4 children grow up surrounded by trophies and the quiet intelligence of 2 people who built an empire from a dinner conversation about sneakers, a decision is already made. The only question left is how long before the rest of the world catches up. Because here is the truth Mirka's confession delivered without ever stating it directly. The greatest investment Roger Federer has made since On Running isn't measured in millions. It isn't measured in market caps or stake percentages or Forbes rankings. It is measured in what happens the next time Alex Eala walks onto a Grand Slam court and the entire world watches, knowing who believed in her before believing was obvious. That is legacy. That is the Federer signature. Not flash, not noise. Architecture, patience, elegance. And now, whether the contract exists yet or not, Alex Eala carries that blueprint whether she knows it or not. Was Mirka's confession an accident or the opening move of something that will reshape women's tennis for the next decade? Drop your answer below, because this conversation is only just beginning. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe, because the next chapter of Alex Eala's rise, nobody is covering it like we are.